I was Chinese.
Wow. It's pretty crazy, but here we are in 2019 at the end of the decade, and Shenmue 3 is actually out. You can go to a store and buy Shenmue 3. It's actually out like 20 years after the second game. Shenmue 3 is actually, it's come out. It's here.
I don't think I have to go into the history really behind this game, but what would a Shenmue video be without a little history? Now, Shenmue came out at the very end of 1999, probably the last game of the 90s on Dreamcast, where it blew everyone away with its story and graphics. Now, you see, I'm what you call a late millennial, or an early zoomer, if you will. I did not play Shenmue back then, or have fond memories of the game. In fact, I didn't actually play the game until it was released in 2018 on modern consoles and hardware. But many people have very fond memories and nostalgia in the game. It starred Ryo Hazuki avenging his father's death in Japan. Anyway, after that, Shenmue 2 was released shortly after. However, the West wouldn't get it until it came to the Xbox. Shenmue 2 was much bigger and grander than the original in almost every way, and had Ryo go to China, actually, to go after the man who killed his father, Lan Di. Shenmue 2 infamously ended on a cliffhanger in a cave where some startling revelation was made, and then the game ended.
2019, after a successful Kickstarter, a ton of delays, and a bit of a controversy, we finally have the game. We have Shenmue 3. And so, here it is, my critical analysis of Shenmue 3. Is it a complete disaster? Let's find out.
Before the game even came out, I think a lot of people were skeptical of the game, from that initial trailer with just terrible graphics to many delays, and then a controversy with Epic Games. This game has seen a lot in its development cycle, but here we are on the PS4 on the title screen. It's fine, it's basic, but again, it's fine. You can see a recap of the previous two games if you want, which is nice, but yeah, then you start a new game. So Shenmue 3 obviously takes place right after 2. It's still the mid-80s, and it's in China. The game literally takes place right where the second game leaves off, in the cave, with the startling revelation Ryo and his friend Shenhua have made. I'm not going to go into spoiler territory here. That'll be a later part of the video, and I will give a huge warning about that. But I will just say that Ryo continues his quest to avenge his father. He is in Bailu, which is in mainland China. He and Shenhua begin searching for her dad, who I guess will know more about these mysterious mirrors. Yeah, the mirrors from the two previous games, this guy, her father, seems to know about them, and they need to find him. That's the most basic, surface-level plot synopsis. I'm going to leave all my story praise and issues till later. I will just say at a surface level, the story is fine. So the gameplay of Shenmue 3, well, it's exactly like the previous two games, like to a T.
I will just say, if you don't like Shenmue 1 and 2, you're not going to like this game. Not at all.
If you've never played the previous two games, I highly recommend you do so. I think you should try the first or second one, and if you like it and enjoy the style of gameplay, then play this game. But if you are not a fan of the first two, do not play this game. It's honestly the most important thing to say about the gameplay. I say that because the gameplay really is virtually identical to the first two. You play as Ryo the entire time. You explore around open environments, talking to people, solving puzzles, gathering clues, collecting items, and performing martial arts. Before we get a little deeper in the gameplay, I think it's important to bring up what Ryo can do. Ryo can obviously move around, but he can run as well. He can run as long as he has health. More on that in a second. He can interact with pretty much every person you see. You can talk to them or ask them a question depending on the situation. You can zoom in like the previous two games. When you zoom in, you can focus on certain things in the world and interact with them. You can actually interact with almost everything in the world in some capacity. You can also bring out Ryo's notebook where he keeps all his notes. It will always have your objective on here just in case you forget. Ryo can also get into fights where the battle system comes into play, which I'll bring up in a few minutes. And that's pretty much what Ryo can do. It's not a lot, but the game certainly makes the most of it. Now, something totally new and different from the previous game is your health. Now, in the original game, your health would only pop up in fights. Here, though, it's always there, and it's always draining. Yes, you are always losing health at all times. To refill it, you have to eat, so basically it's stamina. Food can be bought all over the world as well. However, in fights, it's still your health. When you go back to sleep, though, it also gets fully refilled. But when you run out, you can no longer run until you get a sliver back or you eat something. So that's a bit different, but that's really like one of the only differences from the previous two games. So what will you be doing in Shenmue 3? Well, you will be going around examining everything and talking to everyone in a few open areas. The game still maintains that living, breathing world where all the characters in the world follow a certain schedule. For instance, some characters might be in their houses at a certain time, kids will be out playing during the day, and some vendors might only come out at night. Examining everything and talking to everyone in a few open areas is the name of the game. Essentially, you'll be given a task and you'll have to go around the area talking to everybody about said task until you get an answer. Lots of people go, I don't know, or talk to this person, but eventually you will get a concrete answer to your task. At the beginning of the game, you were simply just looking for Shenmue's dad. So you were just walking around going, have you seen Mr. Yuan? Have you seen Mr. Yuan? Have you seen Mr. Yuan? To everybody until you get some answers. Honestly, the game can feel like a detective game at some points because you will be going around asking tons upon tons of people the same question just to get different answers. Something that was huge in Shenmue before was that you could talk to literally everybody, and I mean everybody in the game, and everybody would have something different to say to you. And for the time, that was mind-blowing. In modern day, not so much. But I will say in Shenmue 3, you can talk to almost everybody. Almost. And you'll be talking to a lot of people, finding clues and taking notes. A lot of the time, you will also have to find a certain item, or obtain an item, or give it to somebody to make them tell you a clue, or something along those lines. But in the end, you really are just looking for clues to continue the story. However, when you are not talking to people looking for clues, you can explore the open areas and partake in a number of side activities. Some of these are returning from the previous game, but there is a number of new ones as well. There's actually a handful of new mini-games, and most of them can be played in the arcade. And these are fun little distractions, I guess. Sadly, the Sega arcade machines are gone though. No Outrun or Space Harrier here. There is definitely more new mini-games and things to do than ones that are returning. Jobs return as well, like a new job has you chopping wood, but at least they turn chopping wood into a little mini-game. It's pretty basic, but it pays. Or one where you are catching ducks and it's QuickTime events. And the best job in the game, it's actually the only returning job, and it's from the original game. It's the forklift. Yeah, the forklift actually makes a comeback as a job, and while it's nowhere near as in-depth as the first game, it is a job, and you can do it in the game, and you can get some money. Now, another returning part of the game is gambling. There is gambling, and there is a lot of it. Like, I think there might actually be more gambling in this game than the previous one, which had a shit ton of gambling. At least they've introduced a few new ways to gamble. It's not all the same, but don't worry, Lucky Hit is still there. There's also a few other little side attractions you can check out throughout the game, like the classic gacha machines where you get a little toy from them, like the original games, or you can spend your money on items in stores. You can buy some accessories and food, of course. You can even buy different clothes for real, but why would you ever change his clothes? Are you kidding me? And you're also going to want to buy some food, like immediately, because you'll quickly find yourself running out of stamina or health or whatever the game calls it. And then probably the biggest new side attraction is herb collecting. Throughout the game you can find herbs. These are usually hidden around the area in grass and you collect them. There are many different types of herbs, and when you collect certain ones you can make sets and sell those sets for money, or if you collect a number of sets you can trade them in for new fighting moves. As you can see, a lot of the game does revolve around money, and it is something you are going to need a lot of. Now, when you aren't exploring the world or talking to people, you're doing something that's related to combat. Ryo has a sort of experience system when it comes to his fighting. He has endurance, attack, and a general kung fu level. Leveling up attack and endurance just automatically levels up the kung fu level. To level up your attack, you actually have to practice. Yes, you actually have to spar and practice your new moves and master them. To level up your endurance, you have to do these new mini games that are all new, like I just said, and these level up your endurance. To level up your attack, though, you are going to have to spar. It's one or the other. You can't level both of them up. Now, there are 3 mini games to level up your endurance, and these 3 include the 1-inch punch, the horse stance, and the rooster step. All of them are fairly basic and easy to understand, but by doing these you will raise your endurance level, meaning your max health will actually also go up. And you're going to want to be doing this because you want that max health up. But now to talk about the combat. The combat has changed a little bit from the previous 2 games. It still uses Virtua Fighter's fighting system, but only to an extent now. You still move around in a 3D plane and perform combos. These combos are really like regular fighting game combos where you have to do button inputs. There's no quarter circles or any of that, but there still is button combinations to perform certain strings of attacks or powerful attacks. You can also block with L2. You can also have one just kind of really powerful move tied to the right trigger. It'll show up on screen under the move you're going to use, and you can use the bumpers R1, L1 to change the move, and then it's tied to the right trigger. You can do a variety of punches and kicks. It honestly feels just as stiff as the original. Dodging is a bit spotty, and blocking doesn't seem to work all the time, but I would say it feels just about as good, if not the same, as the original. For the first half of the game, there really isn't that much fighting. Almost all the fighting you do is generally friendly, and you'll just be sparring quite a bit. However, the second half of the game has a lot more fighting, that's for sure. I think the last thing to mention for the general gameplay is the QuickTime events. These return from the previous two games as well, and are used much more sparingly than those two games. You go quite a while before one even shows up. I will say though that the QuickTime events in this game are not fucking around, not at all. These actually might be some of the hardest, fastest QuickTime events I've ever seen in a video game. I am not exaggerating. They don't even give you a full second sometimes. It is crazy. But I found myself failing a number of these just because I'm just like, wait, what button do I press? And right when I figure out what button to press, it's too late. Or I just pressed the wrong one. I'm not going to say I'm great or even good at these, but in Shenmue 1 and 2, I got most of them on the first try, I can say that. And in this game, I can say I probably only got like half of them on my first try. These actually are really difficult. But that is the general gameplay of Shenmue 3, is seeking out clues, practicing your kung fu by either sparring or doing those minigames or doing other minigames / jobs to pass time. Time does play a part in the game, however, it is nowhere near as much as the previous two games. In the previous two games, time was very important to the game, and I can probably count on one, maybe two hands how many times you actually need to be somewhere at a certain time of day in Shenmue 3. And the very few times it happens, the game actually lets you just skip to that time, which is nice. There is no waiting around. I guess the last thing to bring up would be the locations of the game. Really, there are two open areas in the game to explore: the small village of Bailu and the large city of Niawu. I probably butchered both those. I'd say you spend around an equal amount of time in each, maybe a bit more in the large city, as there is more to do. And while these two open areas are not the biggest, I think they might be around the same size as Shenmue 2. They certainly make up for it in detail though, as I can confidently say that all the space is well utilized. It's all packed to the brim with detail. Speaking of detail, I want to take a moment to look at the presentation of the game. Now this game, when it was originally unveiled, I will be honest, it did not look very good at all. It looked like just an incredibly outdated game. However, fortunately that has changed for the final release. The graphics in the game, if I could put into two words, it would be that it's a mixed bag. For the most part, I think the graphics are good, but there are certain parts of it that are just not very good. Let's start with what is good. The first thing I will say is that the environments, I think they look great. They are just very well done. Everything is a ton of detail. It's just brimming with detail. It's coming out of the cracks. There is so much detail. The environments, they all look wonderful. The water looks great. The trees, the wildlife, it all looks really well done. The architecture, I think, is really well done. The city looks generally well done, and it looks like a modern game. It really does. You also have to remember that this game is a bit more budget than most AAA games, but the environments, they look pretty nice. I'm pretty impressed, I'm not gonna lie. I think the environments stand out and are really well done. It's easily the best part of the graphics. I'd say the frame rate was also generally pretty good. I'm pretty sure it was at 30 frames for the most part, but it was at least consistent, and I rarely saw any drops. I will give it that. It was consistent throughout, and I didn't see any glaring issues with it. There was a little bit of stuttering, especially in the second area when some stuff was like loading in, but for the most part it was fine. While the textures and environments look great and the frame rate is fine, I can't say the same about the models, pop-in, and edges. There was a lot of pop-in present in the game, especially in the last half, where buildings, people, you name it, would just pop in very slowly and it would have to like render in, and that was not great. A lot of the stuff also just looks really rough around the edges, like not smoothed out. It's kind of hard to explain. However, let's move on to those character models. In terms of the art style of the game, I think it's fine, especially with the character models. I think it's a natural evolution from the previous two games. I think it looks good. It doesn't look amazing or anything, but I think the art style, it's fine. It's appealing to me at least. But most of the character models in this game are just not very good, and it's not because of the art style like at all. It's very clear which characters got the preferential treatment. Characters like Ryo and Shenmue and a few others have much more detail and look decent at least, but there are a ton of characters in this game that are nowhere near as big, and they just look awful. Like, I'm not even exaggerating. Some of the character models are just terrible in this game. They are hideous to look at, and they look like abominations and look like something from the 360. It's very up and down, and it's just really clear who they gave the detail to. While I'm still harping on the character models, the facial animations are generally pretty bad. This is just how it is for pretty much all the characters. It's just all around not very good. Sometimes it can be kind of okay for the most part, but it's generally pretty bad. And it's honestly on the same level of detail for the facial animations you would see in the Dreamcast games. And I'm sorry, but around 20 years later, this just isn't going to cut it. It's just really lacking. The lip syncing is awful, like god awful. They did not even attempt to try to sync it up with the English dialogue. It is just awful, and it's some of the worst lip syncing I've seen in a modern game in quite some time. It's really bad, and it's really funny. The animations in the game are pretty much the same story, honestly. They really aren't that much better from the Dreamcast game. They look incredibly stiff as hell for the most part. A lot of the time it just looks like a stick is jammed up their ass, and it has them moving a certain way, and the way they express themselves is just not very good. Honestly, across the board, the entire game, in terms of animation, is just generally pretty poor. All of the animation is just comically wooden, and it just really isn't a large improvement, if any improvement, from Shenmue 2. The only thing I can say is that it has something in common with Shenmue 2's graphics, and that is that it is hilarious in many aspects. Like, it is just laughably bad in the presentation department when it comes to characters, and honestly, I'm not sure if I'd want it any other way. Sure, I'd love some of the character models to not look like freaks, but in terms of bad animation and just terrible lip syncing, I'm not sure if I'd want a Shenmue game to have really good lip syncing or even half decent animations. I think it's just wonderful that the game is the same shit animations that the previous two games have. I'm acknowledging it is terrible, but if it at least gets a number of laughs, like, it definitely got a number of laughs out of me. And if it doesn't get a number of laughs out of you, well, you're dead to me and your sense of humor sucks.
If you know anything, I'd... Huh?
So yeah, the graphics are a mixed bag, but despite them being a mixed bag, I still quite like them, probably for the wrong reasons. But let's move on. Let's talk about the sound now with the game. Like the graphics, it is a bit of a mixed bag, so let's start with the good. The music in this game is very well done throughout the game. The previous two games had excellent soundtracks, and this game is no different. I think all in all, it's pretty great. It's some of the best music I've heard in 2019 in a game. A lot of it is really relaxing, sets the mood really well, and it's just really catchy. A lot of it is laid back and chill tracks, and right now that's my big mood, so I love the music for that. There are a few faster tracks, and these ones are a little more tense, and these are good too, but all the chill music I quite like. The music is also quite dynamic, as many areas have different themes to them. It's not just one constant theme that runs through the entire open area. No, it really is dynamic. I actually really enjoyed the music and thought it was easily the strongest part of the sound. The sound effects were okay. I'm not going to come out and say they were great or amazing. They got the job done, that's for sure. Some of them were quite satisfying, but for the most part they were just kind of there. They existed. Some of the punching sound effects were good, but for the most part everything, like I said, was just there. Nothing really stuck out all that much. But when we get to the part of the sound that we really want to talk about, it's the mixed bag part, the voice acting. The voice acting is something you either absolutely adore and love, or it's something that you just think is an absolute piece of crap. And I am in the former of the two, but let me go into a little more detail. The voice acting in this game is completely unchanged from the original two games. They got all the original voice actors to actually come back to voice characters from the first and second game, and it shows. The quality of the voice acting is better, but the voice acting itself, well, it's still just quite terrible. It still sounds incredibly shallow and just plain. A lot of the voice acting is just laughably wooden, and seems like the voice actors are not even trying at all in many aspects. They very poorly convey emotion, and it is just some of the cheesiest dialogue you'll ever hear in a video game. Not to take a big knock against the writing or anything, but the voice acting itself is just very, very cheesy, and the quality of the voice acting, it's better, like I said, but it's still just quite terrible.
Yes. Everyone lives up ahead. We can ask around. Someone's bound to know something.
Let's not waste another second.
I honestly think Rio still takes the cake in terms of just being the cheesiest character, just the worst voice actor in the game. He loves to repeat what everyone says to him, and he says "I see" more times than I got with your mom.
Yeah, I guess.
I heard about that. Let me thank you as well.
It wasn't anything.
It honestly sounds like they recorded every single word individually and then put all those words together in a random order, and this is what they came up with. It's really hard to judge the voice acting of this game, and the reason is because on one hand, yes, objectively it is bad for all the reasons I mentioned, and it is probably some of the worst voice acting you'll hear in a game in this entire decade, and I can say that since the decade is ending. But they could not have had this game without the original voice actors. There'd be riots in the streets from all the Shenmue fans. They could absolutely not have anyone else play Rio. And for the few other characters, well, most of them have the original voice actors, but there is one or two that couldn't return. But a majority of them do return, I will say that. Not all of them, but most of them. And in addition to this, I would be upset if the voice acting was better. I actually would be. Let me explain myself. Shenmue is really known for having this just very cheesy, silly dialogue for the most part, and just piss poor voice acting. It was one of the defining traits of the series, and if you took that away, I feel like you would be taking away part of Shenmue's soul. What I'm saying is that it's in the DNA of Shenmue to just have generally shitty voice acting. You can't change that. I find almost all the voice acting in this game to just be hilarious. So much of it is just terrible, and it sounds like it's from the original game, and I love it. I think one thing that makes it funnier is to see these halfway decent looking character models, and then you just hear this terrible voice acting. There were many times where I just laughed out loud due to the game's voice acting or terrible animations, and you know what? I wouldn't want it any other way. I don't want to say I speak for all Shenmue fans, but I think I can speak for a lot of them when I say that we would rather have corny, cheesy, stilted voice acting rather than something half decent and just kind of generic. And you know what? It being just so bad, it really resonates with me, it sticks with me, and I'm sure it will stick with me for many more years to come.
But now it's the part of the review where I think I talk about some of the more objectively bad stuff with the game, like what's really wrong with it. Let's just get right into it.
Putting the presentation and voice acting aside, my first complaint with the game is the whole health stamina system. While I can't understand its implementation when it comes to battles, I think having it in the overworld is just a major pain in the ass. You have to be constantly filling this thing up, like on the regular, and it's just a chore in many aspects. You have to make sure you have food, you have to make sure you eat the right food because you don't want to waste the food that gives you more health for that occasion. You have to make sure you're not wasting the food at all because you're not going to go to bed soon. It's just this kind of management that really was not needed in a game like Shenmue. I've even heard some people say that it discourages exploration, and while I disagree with that, if you feel that way, that's just another sign that this whole health management thing is not needed. I think it would be fine if it was for just the battles, like hey, your health is low from the previous battle, eat some food or something, but not when you're running around. It's literally hurting you. And like your health draining, you'll have your health drained for the upcoming fight because you were busy exploring the world. No, that's just not good. I'm sorry, that's just not good. I don't know why this was implemented, and I think they should update the game to make it so you don't lose health when you're exploring the world. It should only go down when you get hurt, and you can fill it up with food, but it doesn't go down when you're running around. But that's just the way it is. It just totally was not needed. My next issue with the game is that there are two giant roadblocks placed down in the game that just kill the pacing, and both of them over the same reason. You need a ton of money. The previous two games, they did this, especially Shenmue 2, but in Shenmue 3, it is way worse than the previous two games. There are two parts in the game where you just need an absolute ass ton of money. Like, it is ridiculous. For the most part, I had just barely enough money to get by, get some food, some items, etc. However, once you get to these two roadblocks, you actually need to start raking in the dough. For instance, cutting wood gets you around maybe 70 yuan. The second roadblock you hit in the game, you need 5,000 yuan. I am not kidding. 5,000. Are you kidding me? This is ridiculous. It is ridiculously high for no other reason than to potentially pad the game out and be this just giant roadblock. I mean, what you have to do now is gambling. Like a lot of gambling. Like way more gambling than you had to do in the previous 2 games, probably combined. You also probably be save scumming so you don't lose all your money gambling in a way. And yes, there are a few little tactics to make it so you're likelier to win at the gambling games, but it only ups your chance. It doesn't guarantee you're going to win. But I spent probably well over 2-3 hours in this game just gambling because I needed enough money to get past these ridiculous roadblocks. All they need was the yuan.
All of this just for some yuan. Yeah, I actually got some yuan when I was in China last year, and well, I'd rather not talk about my experience in China. It was horrible, but story for another day. All for the yuan.
Now, I thought the roadblocks were mildly annoying in the second game, but you could get past them pretty fast. But in this game, that's just not the case at all. It halts you quite a bit. Speaking of being halted, I think the pacing of the game at times can be all over the place. I expected the game to move at a quite slow pace. I mean, the second game in some aspects just took an eternity to get to the point. So I expected that here, but there are a few times where the game really does pick up and go at a decent pace, only to come back down to a crawl again, and it's just kind of inconsistent, and the gambling issue really just did not help with the pacing. And in all honesty, I prefer with the game going at a crawl because it just allows me to take in the world and explore everything. But like I said, there are a few points in the game where this just doesn't happen, especially at the end. My next complaint is that the combat really isn't amazing. While it wasn't very great or even that good in the original 2 games, I think it was at least average, especially for the time. But in 2019, this combat is just pretty subpar. It feels incredibly stiff for the most part. It literally feels as stiff as it looks. It can feel quite sluggish in many aspects, and sometimes the controls are just generally unresponsive, as they think you're like inputting button combos, but really what you're just trying to do is kick the dude in the face. Some of the moves can have a ridiculous amount of wind up and ending lag as well, so that is annoying. In addition to this, the blocking really is pretty suspect. What I mean is that sometimes blocks just don't really work. Like, I'm holding down the block button the entire time and I still get hurt. I understand you can't block every move, but there'll be times where literally even the first punch will hurt me, and it's like, dude, I'm still blocking. It's just inconsistent. And while I will say there is not as much fighting as Shenmue 2, there is still way more fighting than the original game, and I just wish it was a little more refined. There's also no grappling like the original. I don't know, I really like the grappling, but the combat really just feels a bit more shallow, honestly, than the originals, as it is a little different, but it is really unrefined. Okay, so continuing down the list, my next issue is that a few of these activities can get a bit repetitive. Doing the minigames to increase your endurance kind of gets old. I mean, you do them so many times that's like, dude, come on. I didn't feel this way immediately, but towards the end I was really feeling fatigued with these minigames, but it might have been because I was basically marathoning the game. Speaking of repetitive, I could see how someone would find the gameplay getting generally repetitive, as you literally are just going around talking to people trying to find clues for the next part. And while this is the basic gameplay of Shenmue, I could still see someone getting bored of it regardless. I mean, it is fairly basic gameplay. I'm not going to act like it's complex in any way. It's very basic. Luckily, the minigames usually mix up the gameplay enough to keep it from being boring and monotonous, and I think that generally that holds true to this game as well, but I'm not going to act like there wasn't a couple times where it seemed like I was just going through the motions. That's honestly what I felt. My last issue with the game is that it just crashed a number of times on me and there were glitches. Stuff like clipping issues, going through doors, characters not being where they're supposed to be at certain times, and text not being what the character was actually saying. All of these could be patched out though, but I honestly just don't really expect that. Now the next part of the review I want to talk about is the story. Now the story is a huge part of Shenmue 3. I have some good and some bad with it, but I'm going to delve into spoiler territory here.
So we are at the part of the review with the major spoilers. I'm going over the ending, I'm going over my thoughts on it, I'm pretty much spoiling everything with the game. There should be a time on screen. Go to that time if you don't want to be spoiled, because I'm going over everything. I'm going to give you like 3 seconds. 1, 2, 3, that's enough time.
The story in this game, I just feel like it's incredibly mixed. It's great that the story is continuing, don't get me wrong, but in many aspects the story just feels a bit undercooked, underdeveloped, and the ending is just generally insulting. Let me go into some detail. I think the beginning part of the game in terms of the story is great, where it takes place right after the previous game and you're looking for Shenhua's dad. It's great. Yeah, the story is pretty slow for the beginning part, but it's more like familiarizing yourself with Shenmue again after so many years, so I'll let that pass. However, something I don't like about the first half of the game in terms of the story is how these thugs show up and how Ryo interacts with the leader of them. He finds them and beats the crap out of these two thugs, but then this big dude just shows up and beats his ass. This random giant dude just beats his ass. He wipes the floor with Ryo. And I'm just like, are you kidding me? Really? I'm like this because in Shenmue 1, you defeated like, what was it, like 100 dudes or something in like the span of like a couple minutes? And then in Shenmue 2, you defeated the giant fat guy at the end. But then this random big-ass thug is able to beat your ass. Not only does he beat your ass, he actually beats your ass twice. Yeah, he actually beats Ryo in a fight twice. Like, really? I didn't like this at all because it just felt like it was a huge disconnect from the previous two games where Ryo was able to defeat almost everyone he encountered no problem minus that fat dude in 2. But eventually you beat his ass and then you find out that Shenhua's dad is actually in the city that's on the river. So, I mean, it was a decent way to get you to go to that new city. Then, after more exploration, all of a sudden you come across Ren. Yeah, Ren, one of the most pivotal characters in the second game. And I'd say probably the third most important protagonist in the entire franchise, like behind Ryo and Shenhua. And, like, there is no editing here. This is actually how he gets introduced into the game.
Is that better, sir? You're making me repeat myself. This much. I want this much.
This has got to be one of the shittiest returns I've ever seen in like any video game. No fanfare. He literally just shows up, he's getting food, he's like, hey, what's up? I'll see you later. It feels incredibly shoehorned in just to get a familiar character in there. And luckily he does a lot more in the game, especially in the later part, but at first I was like, really? Is that it? He's just shoehorned in here and has no real relevance to the plot, but luckily he does. See, Ryo spends most of his time in the city hunting down this gang, and finally figuring out where their hideout is. He gets there, and guess what? There's another big-ass dude, and guess what happens? Ryo gets his ass beat again. Yeah, he actually loses again. So then he goes and gets Ren to join him. Ren, I guess, is just chilling in the city. They, like, never legitimately explain why he actually came to the city, or how he even knew that Ryo was going to be there. He just says, oh, there's treasure. But he joins you and you go and fight the big-ass dude. And guess what? Both of you they both get their asses beat. So they both retreat. And just like the previous big-ass dude that defeated Ryo twice, they make him go learn a new technique. So Ryo goes to go learn a new technique and then he can defeat the guy. However, after coming back to the base, the big-ass dude is gone. He's actually gone to this castle and has kidnapped Shenhua. So then Ryo, Ren, and a few other friends Ryo makes in the city go to the castle to defeat the evil gang. They're then greeted by this woman who has been subtly showing up throughout the game ever since they got to the city. She makes Ryo give her the mirror, or she'll kill Shenhua. Like, it's the mirror or her. So Ryo just gives her the mirror. Oh yeah, the mirror? I barely even mentioned the mirror in this story. That's because the mirror really doesn't do much in this game. The thugs are looking for it at the beginning, and then you get some foreshadowing with this prophecy scroll thing about the mirrors coming together and getting a treasure or something. It's honestly still pretty vague what the mirrors actually do. You're just told they are important items. I guess we kinda know now that they lead to some treasure or something, but honestly it's just as vague as the last game. Anyway, I was off topic for a second. So Ryo gives her the mirror, and then she says, oh, Landy's at the top of the castle. Yeah, he literally just shows up at the very last second of the game. He is like barely mentioned in the entire game. He is mentioned like 3 times in the entire game. I can count on one hand how many times he gets brought up in the entire game, and he's supposed to be the main antagonist. And while he did not appear in the second game for more than like a cutscene, he was at least talked about all the time. In this game, it feels like he's borderline non-existent for most of it, and then when he shows up, it's just completely out of nowhere. Anyway, Ren and Ryu leave the woman, I guess, and go after Lan Di. However, once they reach the top of the castle, that woman lights the castle on fire and states she will be in charge of the Chi Yu men. So I guess Lan Di is in charge of them. They're like this gang of golem-looking creatures. Yeah, that dude returns, and you actually just beat his ass again. So there is some other weird plot going on with this woman that does not get explained at all, like what her name is, what her goals are, and I guess she just wants to be in charge of this like gang or something. Anyway, the duo get to Lan Di and you actually fight him. I'm not kidding, you actually get to fight him for about 30 to 45 seconds. Yeah, that's it. 3 games now. 3 games, and you still don't get to fight him. You can't even hurt him. He just blocks everything. And he is the final boss of the game. I'm not even kidding. I thought this fight was incredibly underwhelming and just kind of a slap in the face. After that 45 seconds or so, he just begins to kick Ryo's ass. He says he's going to kill him, but then Ren is able to distract him with a replica mirror. Ryo and Ren then retreat from the burning castle. And everyone makes it okay. Everyone makes it out. Ryo, Shenmue, her father, Ren, and all their friends. But Ryo lost the mirror to that mysterious woman who is against Lan Di, I guess? Speaking of Lan Di, he just stands there as the duo left, so I guess he bailed from the firing castle as well. So with everyone saved, Shenmue's dad explains to Ryo that he explains Lan Di's origins and how he made the mirrors. Finally, we get some details, but most importantly, you get told where Lan Di's hideout is in China. This guy knows for some reason. And so then the game literally ends with Ryo and Shenmue and Ren walking on what looks like the Great Wall of China to this really shitty looking like ruins or something, and where they're going to go fight Lan Di, this mysterious woman, and get the mirror back. And that's literally how the game ends, with them going to go fight them. Like, that is actually how the game ends. When I saw that, I was just like, are you kidding me? Are you actually kidding me? Is this a joke? 20 years? Like, around 20 years later, people waited just for another cliffhanger ending? While I probably should have seen this coming, as the director has stated Shenmue 3 isn't the last Shenmue game, maybe I was expecting a bit more closure than this. This is a worse cliffhanger than the previous game. It's a bigger cliffhanger. I was shocked when I saw this ending. I just was kind of upset and felt kind of betrayed, honestly. I expected maybe a little bit more closure than this. This is a worse cliffhanger than the previous game. It's a bigger cliffhanger. I'm just like shocked that they did that. It took literally 20 years to get this far. Who knows if we're going to get a 4th game? And then, is that game going to have a cliffhanger ending as well? Like, where is the conclusion? Or at least some heavy story development. I think the story is alright, but I do have some issues with it. I think the general premise is good, and I think it's a great continuation from the previous game. And I think that a few of the plot twists and turns are good. They're good. But in all honesty, I feel like a majority of the game is just kind of filler in the story department. And while the same could be said about the first 2 games to an extent, I feel like this game had a little bit more of like an expectation to just kind of wrap things up, or at least go somewhere with the story, not be equally, if not more vague than the previous 2 games, like explaining the mirrors more. What is this treasure or whatever? Why did Ryo's dad even go to China besides the train, allegedly? And don't get me wrong, it's good to have some of the story shrouded in mystery still. That's what made the first 2 games' story really good. But it's at a point now where it's been shrouded in mystery for so long that I don't think the payoff will be worth it. It's gotten to a point where it's like to the point of parody, and it's like, dude, it's been forever. When are you going to finally give us some of the thicker plot details? Maybe I just expected too much, but I wanted to know more than the game gave. Maybe that is a sign of a really good story, because I felt so invested that I really wanted more from it, but in the end I just ended up feeling shortchanged. At the end of the game, it literally just sets up another game way too much. Like the last hour or so, with this mysterious woman, her attempt to kill Lan Di, and then Lan Di himself literally not showing up the entire game, barely being mentioned, and then just chilling at the top of this castle. And that is just ridiculously underwhelming. A slap in the face, insulting fight you have with him. And that ending is just terrible. I'm sorry. I know it like sets up the next game or whatever, but I was just not satisfied with that ending in the slightest. I almost feel as in the dark about the story as I did before I started the game. A few questions were answered from the previous game, but new questions were asked. Some of these questions that were asked, they were asked in the original game, and there still is no answer for them. And honestly, at this point, I don't know if there ever will be an answer for them. Like, it's really inconclusive. Now, another gripe I have with this story is Rio getting his ass beat twice and then learning a new move to beat the dude. I was not a fan of this, like, at all. I didn't like this arc that showed up twice. Like, really? Twice in the same game? So yeah, while I think the story at a surface level was fine, I think it really underdelivered in many aspects, as they seemingly kept it purposely vague and barely answered anything from the previous two games. And now there's new stuff I don't understand and have questions about, so it's like, how much progress did we really even make here? I mean, the beginning of the game has you, it literally starts with you looking for Shenmue's dad, and you have to find him. And you find him at the very end of the game. So how much progress did we honestly make? I feel like I may have been a bit all over the place when talking about the story, but I just had so many mixed feelings about it is why that I just kind of have to be all over the place. I like the intrigue to an extent, and I like how it can be kind of mysterious, but I would like some conclusion as well, and this game just has like no conclusion at all. There was at least one good thing. They give you extended history on the mirrors, which was nice. That's like one of the only information dumps you get in the game. That was pretty good. A lot of the game really feels like filler, and people online were complaining that the game feels like filler, and I could see how they could see that, because a lot of it does seem like filler. Honestly, maybe I was just expecting too much. Maybe my expectations were just way too high, and I should have known they're going to make Shenmue 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever it is, and maybe in one of those we'll actually get the conclusion to the story and get some damn answers, but that does not happen in this game at all. Okay, I'm going to chill out for a second. I'm going to shift my attention to some of the characters in this game, because I think it's worth reviewing at least a couple of them as well. Honestly, the characters really hold the story up, and if it wasn't for them, the story would have probably gotten shallow, and most people probably would have stopped caring after all these years. Rio is still just as noble and awesome as he was before this game. He's very nice, he's well-tempered, he's out on a mission, and won't let anything distract him, and I like it. Shenmue is an interesting case, since they have so much depth and character development for her in the second game, and she was introduced in like the last hour or two, but she is given a lot more dialogue, a lot more development in this game, and I quite liked her. She's a good female character. Now Ren, while I mentioned it first, the way he's implementing the story is just super half-assed, and I feel like he was there just for fan service. I mean, his reason for being there is pretty bad too. However, I think by the end of the game, he is able to affirm his inclusion in the game and actually does something remotely important in the story. I mean, technically he really did save Rio from dying, so there is that, and at least the end of the game they acknowledge that he really is like one of the very main characters of this series, and that is good because I like him. Not because he is beyond cut, but because he is an upbeat personality and he's one of the more engaging characters in the series. And while I just talked about 3 characters, let me talk about the lack of a character. The lack of a main antagonist, really. There really is no main antagonist of the game until the very end. In Shenmue 1, it was very clearly Lan Di, and in the second game, it was him and that fat dude. The fat dude was introduced about halfway through the game. In this game, there really is no real big boss until the last hour of the game. Sure, there are some thugs, and the big-ass thug who will beat Rio's ass twice, but there's no big discernible antagonist. And I've already spoken about Lan Di, or really the lack of Lan Di, in detail, so I'm not going to go there again. I'm just repeating myself at this point. So I'm going to end this part of the review by saying the story, it has its ups and downs, and while I mostly talked about the downs, it has some nice moments, it has some decent character development, but there are some real flaws in this story, like how vague some integral parts are, and the lack of a real main antagonist. So overall, Shenmue 3, is it a good or bad game? Well, it depends. Like I said near the beginning of the review, if you did not like the previous games and have not played through the previous games, there is no way you will like this game. I mean, you could, but I think the odds are just incredibly low. With its generally simplistic gameplay, stiff combat, and heavy reliance in the plot on the previous 2 games, I just can't see how you would really like this game. Now, this game was clearly not made with those people in mind. It was clearly not meant for newcomers, and I can safely say the game is made for one type of gamer, and that is Shenmue fans. It is made for people who love the original games. It is unabashedly old school and plays exactly like the originals. It is the same voice acting, the same stiff animation, and continues a generally cheesy plot. It is made for people who love the originals, and that's pretty much it. I haven't really looked at what critics are saying about the game, but I'm sure they're slamming the game because it's got awful voice acting, the graphics are questionable, and the plot in some aspects can be questionable. And like I've said for the millionth time, the gameplay is rather simplistic and just dated. But those are all the things that make the game Shenmue. The sense of mystery, the running around, the talking to people, the bad voice acting. That's what makes it Shenmue, and that's what gives the game a soul. I don't need to dig down in that rabbit hole any further, but that's the essence of Shenmue. Maybe I'm just a fanboy or too big of a fan to see the true negatives with this game, but I liked it. Maybe I'm just crazy and am able to look past this dated gameplay and presentation. I just found the game really incredibly enduring and captivating despite its issues, and I really want to see what happens in the plot. I just really wanted to see what would happen. So yes, while I like the game, I know it's a beyond acquired taste, and most people probably won't like the game. The only people that will like it are Shenmue fans, plain and simple. If you don't like the other ones, don't play this one. If you aren't all that interested in what you see with the game, don't play this one. It's not your type of game. But for us Shenmue fans, it is our type of game, and I enjoyed it. Was it absolutely amazing? No, it wasn't, and the game certainly has some actual flaws with it, like I brought up earlier. It took me quite a bit of time to beat. The game took me around 25 hours. That's around the same length as the first one, I'd say. I would still honestly say that this game is also in third place on the ranking scale for Shenmue games, but it was still good. It wasn't mind-blowing, but it was exactly what I wanted from Shenmue 3. They didn't try to modernize the game. They didn't try to change any of the gameplay mechanics. They didn't even attempt to make the voice acting good. They wanted to make it as old school as possible, and all I can do really is commend Yu Suzuki. That's just great. And I commend his team as well, because they really went for that old school feel, and I feel like they hit it. They didn't try to make it like Yakuza at all. They didn't try to modernize it. This game has its own distinct feeling, and while Yakuza is a lot better, it is totally different from this game. And now I'm getting sidetracked.
Well, all in all, I enjoyed my time with it. It wasn't great or amazing or even very good, but it was all right, and I still enjoyed my time with it as a Shenmue fan. It's definitely not for everybody, and as a modern game, it kind of falls apart, but I still liked it as a Shenmue fan. Better late than never, right? I mean, it definitely wasn't worth that wait. No game's worth that wait, but better late than never. And will there be a Shenmue 4? I don't know. I really don't. If Shenmue 3 could happen, though, maybe Shenmue 4, but yeah, I don't know. Definitely not everyone's cup of tea, though, that's for sure. So I'll see you in about 30 years when Shenmue 4 comes out, and I'll be an old-ass man ready to die. So have a good one. Well, if you made it to this part of the video, major thanks, much love. It took me a while to make that video and play through Shenmue 3. I wanted to get through the game as fast as possible to give my thoughts on it and actually get my money back because I returned the game. But much love. If you like the video, sub, like, favorite, like, dislike, comment. Just let me know. Yeah, have a great Christmas.